I want to start out with, we're dealing with our discipleship journey that is a portion at the very end of part 1 of the book. And I grabbed out this Marcus Garvey quote. People without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And hopefully that will make sense more even as we go along. So we're going to try now to move along, and I'm going to leave the video gallery up there so we can see all the lovely faces of the people who are online.
Hi, Penny.
But from time to time, I'm going to have to move the gallery around so we can, in the classroom here, we can see the questions. So these are the questions I kind of drew out of that section of the book. Discuss the families into which you were born, as well as the family you have created as an adult. Where did your family originate, and what land did they own or work? What's the history of your family and forebears, quote, doing the will of God, unquote? And what's your history with the Mission Road / Prairie Village congregation or other congregations? The first question I have is, why do the authors ask these questions at the end of part 1?
Does it have anything to do with Christ's lineage?
It could, but probably, remember, we're dealing with the book of Mark.
Right.
So which doesn't have a lineage.
It probably has to do with this, where he says, who is my family, those who do the will of God.
Okay.
I think it also has to do with who we disenfranchised.
Okay.
When we took our land.
Okay.
Because at the opening of the conference, they have the first peoples come in with their big feather thing that they hang up, and they acknowledge that we have land that belongs to first people.
Right, right. And I'm going to disappear for a moment and close the door. Any other reasons why?
Well, I think they were trying to, again, I think this book is talking about, do we currently just want to keep the status quo, or do we want to be like Jesus and reach out to those who are disenfranchised, kind of? So I think, what are we doing to maybe change the status quo? Because I think kind of.
Well, the authors also talk about, and it ties in with a little bit of what you said, about who's on the fringe and who's in the center. Who's in the seat of power and who's in the wilderness, as John and Jesus basically were. And so we need to understand where we came from as far as the land that we have. And a lot of it ties in with the term we've come to know recently called generational wealth. What does generational wealth mean?
If you had people in the distant past earn money, it gets passed down through inheritance to you. And if you got nothing times nothing is nothing. So you have none.
Exactly. That many of us, most of us, are beneficiaries of the fact that our past ancestors, in some way or other, established land, home, business, occupation, and that we are beneficiaries of that. Now, that's not always the case. I mean, there's always a prodigal son who wander off and do their own thing, and maybe or maybe not come back. But many of us are beneficiaries of the fact that the land on which this country was founded belonged to somebody else. That many of our ancestors came over here as immigrants with nothing, sometimes had to change their names, so that they could blend in with American society. Many of them worked in factories at very low wages to make it better for the next generation, which then worked hard to make it better for the next generation. So part of it is the authors are saying, who are you? Where do you come from? What benefits have you had or not had? So with that, I kind of think I want to have, if you have a response to any of these questions, I'd like to have you respond to it, but come up here to the hot seat. And the reason for that is, if you listen to any of our classroom discussions, you'll see that the people out there are barely heard. And we do have people online, and I'd like to have them be able to hear what you say. So if you want to, you don't have to go in order. If you want to respond to any of these questions, come on up to the hot seat. I'm going to turn the computer so you're on camera, and the audio will pick you up really well. So as they say in some prayer and testimony services, who will be first?
I'll go first.
Yay.
Good.
So I did my family tree for at least one branch. So my family started with, I have two branches of the family that were here early on. One was, it's upside down. Philip Roundy, who immigrated from the Isle of Guernsey, and maybe before that, the family came from France. In the 1830s, Uriah Roundy, who was, let's see, a great-great-great-grandfather, and his brother Shadrach Roundy joined the church and their families. Shadrach was a bodyguard to Joseph Smith, and one time he carried an old hickory stick. Let's see, there's that picture. And was standing at the gate of the prophet's house, and basically he was kind of mean looking, and he had a hickory walking stick.
Don't mess with him.
Now, and so he and then the guy that was down by the river came up, and they sort of disbanded the group. But Uriah, when went up to Council Bluffs, Shadrach went to Salt Lake, and there's a huge family. They just multiplied in Salt Lake. And then Uriah stayed in Council Bluffs and went about 50 miles, or his descendants went 50 miles west at Gallons Grove of Council Bluffs.
Mhm.
So it would have been west or
In
north.
Nebraska. Oh,
No, they were in Iowa.
So east, northeast.
Yeah, northeast, sorry. I get my
That's all right.
So my great-grandmother was Rose Roundy, and she married George, and they had 9 children. One died at birth. And I remember most of them. I don't remember Harry. So my grandmother was choral Argot singer, and she was very active in the church, as were many of the Argot singers. She was kind of in the middle. And so then she had 2 children, my uncle and my father. And then I also showed me in my marriage and his previous marriages and his daughters. So yes, we probably took a lot of Indian land. There was a story about one of Uriah's daughters having bought land that the U.S. government was selling, but they couldn't occupy it until the First Peoples left. Basically, they were farmers and farmed the land. Not a lot of wealth, just land. My father was the younger, so he didn't get the farm. He ended up working different places. Two of the early members, Robert, they said his occupation was coaster. They lived in on the coast of Massachusetts. So I don't know what a coaster is. And then another one was a weaver, and that's the only ones I knew, but mostly they were farmers.
Good. Good.
And my father almost lost his Roundy family in America, so he started copying it, but I think it's been recopyrighted now. So
that is your maiden name.
Weiss is my maiden.
Weiss.
My grandfather, who died when my father was just before my father turned 4, was an immigrant from Germany. Well, it may have been France at the time. And then my mother is an Adams and is a relative through cousin of President Adams. I don't know all the history. Her mother was a first generation. Her parents came from Denmark. And then her father's wife was from Norway. So we have a mix of long history in the country and short history. Most of them immigrated after post-Civil War.
Okay. Who will be next? Jerry, I know you've got something prepared.
He does.
Well, I do.
Come on up here.
You want me to come up here?
Yes.
Yep.
The hot seat.
Do you want this, Jerry? Do you want this?
No.
Okay.
I got carried away. And from Jonathan's questions, it's all Jonathan's doing that I got carried away. And so I started typing out things that were responsive to the questions for today. And I just kept going until all of a sudden I had a full page here. So I'm just going to read it because I think it does address the inquiries you had there about family, about the influence of the church, of our religion, everything. So bear with me if you will. Where in your family or community do you see people doing the will of God? I see people doing the will of God in our Mission Road congregation of the Community of Christ. But may I also share several personal memories from my own family history, from my age 3 through high school, and from past friendships with members of the Armourdale and Grandview, Kansas congregations through the Depression years of the 1930s and World War II years of the 1940s, accepting and including in and our family in church school of personal friendships that continually befriended my parents and me by providing welcome congregational music and Wednesday evening fellowship. I remember my parents, together with others, providing ministry, fellowship, and music in our congregational services. And I think of our Wednesday evening prayer services and often of other occasions, especially in our Kansas City state congregations, Armourdale, 1929 to 1935, and Grandview, Kansas, 1935 to 1947, and through World War II. An unplanned part of my early years included 2 years of active duty in the United States Army, mostly in Karlsruhe, Germany after World War II, and it became an unexpected venture to making new friends, especially with the saints in our small congregation in Stuttgart, Germany. Karlsruhe was about 1 hour by train from Stuttgart. So once or twice a month, I traveled to Stuttgart and attended our RLDS worship services there. I think of my education at Graceland College and the University of Kansas and the continuing engagement with our church from 1947 to 1953 and later, to include law school from years 1955 through 1958, and of enduring friendships arising from those experiences. I am grateful for my professional engagement and responsibilities as a lawyer in general trial practice from 1958 through 1985, and then as a United States Magistrate Judge from 1985 through 2018. But it was also a privilege to serve in our Kansas City stake as pastor, and later as a counselor to several of our stake presidents, and also to serve on the church's Standing High Council from 1976 to 2002, which provides advice to, as requested by the First Presidency, for legal and other primarily administrative matters. Since about 1990, I have been privileged to join first with my late wife, Joy, and now with my wife, Debbie, as members of the Mission Road congregation. For that fellowship, I am very grateful. In each of these roles, the challenges to fulfill them was beyond anything Jerry Rushfeld could ever provide without the help of God and our Lord Jesus Christ. But I do believe that God has blessed both my family and me as an individual by helping us to be faithful to our callings as disciples of Christ and to provide the best counsel, judgment, and service that we could. At times, that was a challenging and uncertain circumstance, but for the blessings of God and our Lord Jesus Christ, and for the inspiration of family and church and many friends, I shall always be grateful. I apologize for rattling on like this,
No,
but it
not a
was
problem.
my effort to respond.
Yeah.
And I just want to add and emphasize to it, I have been blessed all my life by our church, by this congregation. We're blessed by what we're doing here this morning. We're talking about what is important in life, what has influenced. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity. Thanks.
Well, we're glad you're part of it too.
Yeah.
Well, as if this were a prayer and testimony service, who will be next?
I can talk about my family. I don't know about.
Come on over.
Won't take long. Nadine tried to help me look some things up. She does Ancestry.com and has accumulated a lot of information about her family and a little bit about my family, but I hope when I retire to work more on that and understand my heritage. On my father's side, his family came from Cornwall, England. I believe in the middle 1800s. I know we had family members out in Colorado during the silver boom out there, so it had to be sometime before that. They were tin miners, and the tin ran out in the mines. I don't know what kind of land they owned, or
They didn't.
Hmm?
They probably didn't.
Probably didn't own any land. I know they weren't wealthy. They came to this country and primarily moved to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and mined in the copper mines there. I'm almost certain were not members of the early Latter-day Saint movement. I think my father, I remember, told me that they were members of the Methodist Episcopalian Church, which was a denomination that was common in England, so that would make sense coming from Cornwall. They, I believe, encountered the church in the late 1800s. I heard the name J.J. Cornish mentioned, so I know they probably heard him preach or maybe were attracted to the church through his ministry. But we did find the name of the person who baptized my grandparents and probably great-grandparents in the early 1900s, around 1907, I believe, and his name was Shippey, Elder Shippey. I'm not sure what congregation or anything that they attended. My paternal grandparents stayed in Fenton, Michigan. They lived there. My grandfather worked for General Motors. They bought a house which they owned their entire lives in Fenton. I think my grandmother's family were weavers, and I think they were actually the first ones who came in contact with the church. I'm pretty sure my grandfather, one from England, probably, I'm getting a little confused here on the relationships, but I think he came into the church because of her. But I'm not sure when. We'll try to find his baptismal record and see what we can find. But he served as an elder in the congregation. I don't know what my grandmother knew as far as theology. I don't remember her reading the Bible a lot or reading books, but she was a service person. She was a doer. And she was always taking care of people and doing things for the congregation. That was kind of her ministry. On my mother's side, they were Lutheran. My grandfather fought in World War I. They settled in Sisseton, South Dakota, which was either next to or on a Sioux reservation. I remember my mother saying she went to school with Sioux children, and they would get in terrible fights. And so she was always afraid that somebody was going to be injured because of the fights they'd have at school. In 1844, my grandmother, they were Lutheran. My grandmother came into contact with the church through a lady in California. What she was doing in Sisseton, South Dakota, I don't know, but she bore her testimony. My grandmother was absolutely infatuated with her testimony, got a copy of the Book of Mormon, and I have that copy. I should have brought it this morning. She's marked it all up and written in it, and she was obviously deeply affected by the message of the Book of Mormon. My grandfather worked as a manager of a J.C. Penney store. That's all I know. He, at a very young age, developed rheumatoid arthritis and was pretty disabled all the time that I knew him as a grandparent. I think probably in his late 40s, which is how old he would have been when they moved to Independence. I don't remember that there's any record of him working after that time. So I'm not sure how they subsisted. My grandmother in her youth or in her younger years was a nurse, but I don't remember her ever working as a nurse. So I don't know how they made money. Perhaps he was just on disability or something. But they had a nice little home on North Pleasant Street in Independence, and that's where they lived all of their lives until my grandfather passed, and then my grandmother moved to Leavenworth to be close to my parents. That grandmother was a voracious reader and studier. She wanted to know everything that she could. I can't attest to all of the quality of what she received, but anything that she heard from a priesthood member, she believed it and wanted to know more about it. I don't know that historically everything was as accurate as that could have been, but the message of the restoration as it was in those days, really was important. They joined the church in 1945 on October 17th, I believe. Let's see, what else? Families in the so land, we were never wealthy. Families were never wealthy. History of the families. So I had one grandmother who was a doer, one grandmother who was a studier. Grandfathers, kind of went along and they were participants, but I think they were more there because they were married to women who were actively involved in church. I don't ever remember them saying a lot one way or the other how they felt about that. I think they just kind of went along with what the women wanted them to do in that time. My history, I think I started coming here in 1986, and I was working at that time, but preparing to be a student at KU Medical Center. That's about the time that Nadine and I met and got married in 1987. We've been here ever since. I was called to the priesthood at the age of 15 to the office of deacon. We lived in Germany at that time, and my father was the European pastor or president for the European Theater military church members, and so I became his bishop's agent at the age of 15. And felt like, I tried to treat that job as responsibly as a 15-year-old could, but I remember filling out all of the slips and mailing them to people for their receipts for their offerings. So that's pretty much my family.
So who's your dad?
Kent Bennetts.
And who's your dad's dad?
Weldon J. Bennetts.
And
Weldon John R.
your grandmother?
I have two Mabels. So Mabel Bennetts on that side, Mabel Lundgren on the other side. And
where did Mabel and Weldon live?
they lived at 306 East High Street in Fenton, Michigan.
And what congregation did they go to?
He's
They
trying
went
to
to
get
the
you.
Bristolwood congregation, which is where Jonathan's parents went,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So they did know each
yeah.
other.
Yeah, they were very close friends.
Small world.
So
Yeah, and I know their next door neighbor was a cousin or some relative of Ed Sullivan, because we had to, whenever we were up there, we had to watch Ed Sullivan on Sunday night because the neighbors were, going to be doing that and wanted to see who was going to be on the show. So. Any other questions?
nope, I just wanted to make that connection. So, anyone else? Answer any of the 4 questions up there.
So I can do a little if you want.
Come on up. By the way, I like this mode of teaching better. I don't have to say too
Yeah,
much.
you're not
Ask loading questions.
Right.
So I have loved to do genealogy, and I feel like in my family, I'm the historian of this generation. And I'm fortunate my mother was the historian of her generation, and her father was the historian of their generation. And then we had some other uncles that helped. So I've been richly blessed because they did a lot of the work. But in doing my genealogy, some of the things that have come out have been that there has been a religious aspect to many, many generations going very far back. I knew we were French Huguenots in the family on my mother's side. And as I've kind of worked through that, they were kind of a religious, rebellious group. They broke from the established group, the Huguenots, and they had to flee France to Ireland, and then they came, some of them, to the United States. Then there were, on my father's, I don't remember which side, mother's side probably, we had Puritans way back because they came across on the Mayflower. I just learned that recently, and they settled in Massachusetts. And then as time went on with that group, one of my ancestors was actually accused of witchcraft, and she was killed. And so weirdly enough, I've always been very mad at Cotton Mathers. And in college, when I had to read about him, I'm like, I do not like this guy. And it wasn't until like 40 years later I found out, I know why I didn't like that guy. He killed my grandmother somewhere down the line. But one of the cool things about my Puritan family was they started having secret prayer meetings with Quakers because they didn't like the rules the Puritans had gotten into. And they started meeting with the Quakers because they felt like that peaceful religious group was more to their liking. And they kept getting fined by the Puritan people. So my point is, I had rebels way back in my family tree. So I know where I came from in that. That's somewhere in me. Moving forward, my father's side came from Germany. And they were probably Methodists, and throughout the family tree are farmers, ministers, and one other, teachers. And so we always found that kind of an interesting thing when we looked at that family tree branch. The branch I was telling Paul about on the way over is my mother's father's side, and that is the one where Isabel, an 18-year-old girl in London, was very concerned because she had a very sick sister and heard about a revival meeting of a person from America who had come over from the Mormon church. This was right in time after Joseph had either been killed and Brigham was taking over, but Isabel thought this is the only hope my sister has. The doctors had given up on her. And sure enough, she went to this meeting and her sister was healed. The whole family except the father converted. The whole family except the father got on a boat and came to America. They got to Port of New Orleans, and probably he apparently was on board, or his wife, but the baby had died. Their baby had died. So my fourth great uncle was given the duty of taking the body of the baby back to Salt Lake, left his siblings and his mother, and went there, and they went to St. Louis, where tragedy befell upon them, and they still were members, believing, but something had turned them from going out to Salt Lake, so they did not go. And then cholera happened, took the mother, and my fourth great grandfather stepped into the picture because he had lost his wife, married my 18-year-old great grandmother, fourth great grandma, and in time they moved to your family's neck of the woods in northwestern Iowa, and they all were converted and they all worked. And as generations then coming down from them, I had a third great grandfather who was a member of the Standing High Council. Many of them were ministers. I have pictures of both of my great grandfathers preaching. It kind of skipped a generation, came to my parents, and they were both ministers, even though my mother wasn't ordained ever. She was a full-time partner with my father, who became an appointee, felt his calling. Our family lived that way. So to all your questions, I think throughout our family, going way back, we have always had God at the center, and a belief in Jesus, and a belief in servant ministry, and have given pretty much all we can. We didn't have a lot of wealth. They did find some farmland up in Iowa, and they kept getting flooded out and all kinds of crazy things. They might have had little rickety houses here and there. They scraped together money. They were miners. They didn't have a lot of money. Again, I don't know that we owned very much ever. But I know that for the most part, everybody has provided, in my immediate family. My brothers and sisters are all pastors and ministers in some way. So it's always been a part of our family, and we feel like we've tried to raise our girls to be very much, giving to others. And so that's kind of where my family came from. And I love the part that we're rebellious. And I hope that kind of always helps me want not to have the status quo.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's it.
Thank you.
That's a lot.
Anyone online want to contribute?
I would like to.
Go ahead.
I don't see myself. Do
We
you guys see me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My history is a little bit murky because I can't get my parents to talk about it very much.
Oh, no.
But I did. I don't know why. We just have never really talked about our history. My mom did a little bit of hers, and I think her history in the church goes back further, but I need more time to get more out of her. But I do know that it doesn't go all the way back to the foundation of the church or even the reorganization. That's what I kept pushing for, how far back. And it turns out that my grandfather on my mother's side, his whole family converted in Colorado. I don't know what the event was. Maybe somebody else will know this, but it was in the 1920s that his whole family converted, but there was a lot of controversy. So some of them ended up Mormons, some of them ended up Petrikites, and some of them ended up in our church. So it was a real controversy in their family. So Mom has always said over the years that we were probably baptized as Mormons. And then on Dad's side, it was another conversion experience from his grandmother, Mote. They're from Switzerland, but it was his grandmother that was converted, he thinks, down in the southern Missouri area from a guy named Hobart. I don't know if Jerry knows that name.
I do.
Yeah, so it was my grandmother, and her husband didn't go, so she took it was my great grandmother Mote who took my grandmother Irma to church, and then Irma married my grandfather Sam, and it took, my grandfather didn't convert until my dad was 10 years old, so there was a lot of conversion experiences in my family, which is kind of interesting. But of course, you guys know that I grew up a pastor's kid, and Dad pretty much, he was a priest for 1 year, but then after that he became an elder, and he was a pastor in every church that he attended until, oh my gosh, late in the 2020, I would think, maybe 2010s era. But the best story that they told me about was when Dad first was ordained an elder. Mom was with him, and she said that during that service, she felt hands on her head, and she literally turned around because she thought someone had laid their hands on her head, but it was actually God confirming Dad was an elder and that this was going to be her life too. And so I thought that was a cool part of our history, and it clearly shaped my world.
Thank you, Jane. I want to add something to that. I was listening to a video recording, and I wish I'd looked up the year, but several years ago, Paul was kind of the MC of a history remembering out here in the fellowship hall. And in one part of it, Bill Landrum, obviously Jane's dad, talked about the founding of this Mission Road congregation. And he pointed out clearly that there was, between Overland Park and Prairie Village, there was a lot of dissension between the two groups. They were two congregations meeting in one church, this church right here. And the stake or mission center or whatever it was at that point decided it was time to bring the two congregations together. And they were having a hard time figuring out how to do it. So Bill was approached to be the pastor. And he said he would do it on a couple conditions, and one of which was that Margaret Athey would be the music director. I'm trying to remember what the other one. The other one might have had to do with Russ May, being handling. And I think Jerry was in that too. I think he wanted Jerry as a counselor. But anyhow, I just thought it was kind of interesting that this congregation started as two separate entities and has now become, very much a very unified group. Yes.
It started as one.
Right.
It started as one in 52.
Yeah.
1952.
Yeah, 50. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We actually started here when they were split.
Yeah.
So it was in the 70s that the church decided to split them, and a lot of us know about the frustration and the anger. And Dad was the pastor of the Overland Park congregation, because we had just moved to Mission, Kansas from Iowa like a year before, and Dad was pastor at Malvern Hill first, and then only a year, because then the stake president asked him to come and be the pastor in the Overland Park. The early, I remember going to church early in the morning, and passing people in the hall that we didn't really know who they were. It was I don't know why the World Church did that to us. That was not a good idea. But then he was also asked to be the pastor when they went back together. So that was kind of the history of us at this congregation.
Okay. Debbie, you've had some comments. You want to come up here and comment further?
Okay. Maybe just on the history of Prairie Village Mission Road.
Whatever you care to talk about.
You probably remember some too. Okay. In 1952, my dad was in the Navy, and we lived in Bath, Maine, and they were commissioning a new destroyer that had, it was a brand new element of the Navy, and it was pretty secretive at that time. It was pre-nuclear, and it was called the USS Timmerman. I don't know if any Navy people are around, and even anyway. So Rodney was the age of 4. He could start school, kindergarten here. So Grandma and Grandpa drove to Bath, Maine, and we all rode back with them. So Rodney could start school in September of 52 as a 4-year-old in kindergarten. And they had already started the group of Prairie Village at that time. Since we were misplaced, we were not the original, but we were close to being in the original group. Just misplaced by a few months. Then I think it was while I was at Graceland is when the stake presidency in the early 70s, or 69 or 70, I believe it was, when they came up with this idea of giving everybody more responsibilities on, having the church grow into 2 big congregations in one spot. They did the same thing at Pleasant, in
Pleasant Heights and Ridgewood.
Yes, and
Yeah,
Susquehanna, whatever that.
I
Yeah.
belonged to Pleasant Heights at that time, but I was in college, I think, and or maybe afterwards.
Yeah, so that was, and I think it was in 71 or 72 when they decided, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And somebody that I know, it may be my husband Jerry, said that Dave Bowerman at that time said, maybe I made a mistake. That's what we do when we are led in one direction and we can realize that maybe that wasn't the way to go. But that's all I really wanted to share with that. And I know part of the Overland Park Prairie Village quest of coming together was to name it Mission Road and not to have the Overland Park people coming back to Prairie Village, and that was a compromise, which was very good. I still think of this as Prairie Village, but I say Mission Road more now all the time. It took me a few years, but I did go to Susquehanna for a while when I was married for a short time, and I also went to Storm Lake, Iowa, Northwest. You mentioned Northwest Iowa, Cherokee.
Kind of north.
Pisgah was the origin of the Page family and the Holden family.
Pisgah.
So,
I remember the name Pisgah, and I'm sure I've been to Pisgah.
Yeah. So and Olathe. I was there for a long time, living in Olathe as a single mom. But this has always been home. This is kind of where the Spirit leads me, and I hope continues to lead me the right direction. But that's all I wanted to add.
Good. Well,
I think
you.
you've heard me expound on my lineage in the church, and I don't need to do that again. Anyway, thank you.
I think we've learned the hard way that congregations are living organisms that are very difficult to disrupt.
Yeah.
I think when they brought 3 congregations together to be the Highlands, they lost probably close to half of the
Is that
membership.
right?
Yeah, because they just couldn't meld.
It was
They didn't learn the lesson of
Nashua was one.
Gladstone,
Gladstone.
Tacoma.
And
See, Gladstone and Tacoma were another split, just like Prairie Village Overland Park.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. How that
Same
happened.
time.
Houston Hobart. What's the name?
Oh, okay. Houston Hobart.
Hobart.
Houston Hobart.
Yeah. And Jane, was that the name? Houston Hobart? You hear me?
Hobart.
Houston was his first name?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Did he have this ministry down in southern Missouri?
I think he was a 70s, so I think he probably was down in there.
Okay, that was the name Dad remembers.
Yeah,
Nana.
my parents do. So.
Yeah, or my Nana Irma Landrum talked about him as being instrumental in converting their family.
It was milling in my head all this time, and finally.
Cool. I knew somebody would know his name. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've had someone else slip into the hot seat here, so.
So as I was looking through heritage stuff after Jonathan's email, I had never heard this before, but on my dad's great-grandparents' side, my great-great-grandfather was nobility in Sweden and was to marry, an arranged marriage back in those days where you have to marry this person. He didn't like that idea, had fallen in love with somebody and jumped on the boat to America. And
That was a Peterson.
married, yes,
Okay.
Carl. We have like 3 Charles Carl Petersons all in a row. So, but my grandma, Minnie, grew up in Kansas City, Kansas, got involved in church, went to Stone Church for years, started here when Prairie Village first started. My dad and probably the Vaughns and the Giles all went door to door throughout Prairie Village trying to recruit people to join this location. And yeah, so my mom got baptized with Debbie and Maddie Burlington as an adult, came to the church, and my grandma was born in 1894 and lived to a week shy of 80, and this location was her life. So you got to tell the story about your family moving from Utah in the middle of the night.
Wait a minute, Karen, are you a princess?
Yes. We
You
do
didn't
that.
Oh,
How
cool.
could you recognize that?
Yay.
Ron, are you gonna?
We got time.
I got time. Come on.
Come on, Ron.
There's just enough time.
This is a good story.
I thought I had a story like that, but it wasn't near.
I will make this as brief as I
exciting.
can.
Okay, go for it.
Heritage church-wise goes back through my mom's side to my grandma's side. So it's through the women back. But basically it came from Europe. Some of them were from Germany, some of them were from Wales. So that's about the only trades in Welsh that I know.
That's better than me.
Me too.
But anyway, came over about the time of the movement to Utah. So not in the exact years here, but anyway, so great-great-grandpa did go to Utah, was out there, and when the presidency said you'll have another wife, he decided he didn't want to do that. But the militia at the time tried to prevent any of those kinds of things. So they basically loaded up their wagon in the middle of the night, wrapped it with sheep clothes. This is the story. Okay, and just took off. The gun that he had went discharged on his way home, and he shot himself in the foot. but that gun has become one of these little family things, and right now my cousin has it. My brother wants it really bad. They're both getting up there in ages. I don't know what's going to happen to the gun. I have seen the gun. But
Don't let them have
years
it.
ago.
They're that old.
But my
Get themselves in
grandma
the
actually and grandpa had that gun. So anyways, that just a little, but they actually, came
The
back from
militia prevented them from leaving.
right.
Yeah.
But they came back and they settled back up in Sturgisville, Missouri. And we were part of that area of, if you know that area out by Maple Grove, Shursville. And that's where then my grandmother and grandfather got together. But they were all church people. And from that. But grandpa was from Germany, was the oldest son. And so his father, when he was a migrator, didn't like the idea that everything went to the oldest son. So he gave everything to the youngest son. So that's just another part of the family story kind of thing. But we've had a long church life. I'm about the fifth generation church member. And I've been here at Mission Roads for a long time. My uncle, 67, yeah. My uncle was actually organist here for about 53, 4, 5. Jesse Ellers was his name.
Okay.
And so I remember coming here. Actually, one of his kids got married here in Prairie Village in mid-50s. Mm-hmm. But the building was just built, right? So it's kind of brand new thing, gravel parking lot. I mean, it was, right. So it was. So that was my first acquaintance here. But then I loved this area. I had been down to visit him a lot, and when I graduated from Graceland, had the opportunity to fly around. And I said, well, I'll go to Shawnee Mission. And they offered me a job, so I came and been here ever since. Yeah. So I was part of the Prairie Village congregation, a part of Prairie Village, then Overland Park. And so I've been through all of that, and it just seems like there are times that we as people,
like 3 in 1.
Yeah, we as people just have issues with each other, and then things happen, and I just like to say that I feel that I'm committed to Jesus Christ, and my commitment and home, as Debbie said, is here. And I just tried to make this the best place that I'm at.
Well, thank you. I wish we had more time to even go further, but since we don't, I want to just show you one slide here. Paul mentioned J.J.
Oh,
Cornish.
he left.
Oh, that is J.J.
You're gonna have to show him.
I'll show it to him another time. But my grandmother was also converted by J.J. Cornish. She went throughout Michigan, the thumb area, the upper part of the Lower Peninsula, and he was a well-known church member, elder, and missionary. And I'm going to skip the next several because you folks filled up the time, so I didn't have to. And we'll skip this and go to here for next week. Next week, please read the opening meditation for and chapter 6 for part 2. So that's what we'll. I'm not sure who's teaching. I should know, but I don't remember.
Paul is, but I think they were going to do a
presentation.
Oh, that's
World
right.
Conference.
Okay, so this
review.
This may be 2 weeks away.
Good.
So
I could use that extra time.
Okay.
And the school coming up.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here
Yeah.
and sharing.